Good morning. So nice to see everybody here this morning. Welcome to the 2023 Field Instructor Appreciation and Adjunct Instructor Appreciation Brunch. We are so happy to be in person after 2 or 3 years, I don't even know. So it's so nice to be here today. I'd like to introduce, oh yeah, let's clap. Yes. We'd also like to welcome our online participants as well. We have about, 80 or so people online as well, something like that. Do we have a count? How many people are online? We'll go with. Not 80 yet. Okay, they're rolling in. They're rolling in. We had about 80 people registered, so welcome all of our online participants. I'd like to introduce Dr. David Miller. He's going to officially kick us off for a welcome here. Dr. Miller.
Thank you, Nicole. I just want to give greetings from the Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences. I'm standing in this morning for our colleague, Dean Dexter Voisin, who sends his regrets. He had another meeting this morning. So I am here to welcome you. Welcome to this great facility. And I want to say a deep, heartfelt thank you for all the work that you do to help our students learn. Because without you and your efforts and your guidance, you're pushing them, you're sometimes kicking them, they would not be the social workers that they are. And it's so good to see some of my former students who are colleagues. It just brings back a lot of memories. Enjoy yourself. Nicole and her staff have a tremendous program ready for you today. Enjoy the food, enjoy the facilities, and go Guardians. Thank you.
Put my readers on here. All right, welcome. So my name is Nicole Parker. I'm the Assistant Dean of Field Education and External Relations, and it's a pleasure being here today. Thank you. For this portion, we'd like to recognize our community partner, practicum organizations, and field instructors who create such a large impact on our MSW students' growth and development. We really appreciate your partnership. This gathering is just a small token of our appreciation, and we could not do this program without you. We really couldn't. So I'd like to introduce our field team. This is an amazing team. We have first of all, please stand as I introduce you. The Field Education Department works diligently to ensure that students have the best practicum learning experience possible. This team, who you're about to meet, are some of the most dedicated and hardworking individuals I have ever worked with. They are passionate, they are competent, and they go above and beyond to support students in field education. Please allow me to introduce to you the matriarch of our field education department, Miss Henrietta Jones, who is standing right here, and it is her birthday. Happy birthday, Henrietta. We also have our online field faculty advisors. Please stand. We have Dr. Angela Whitten. We have Susan Snyder. And we have Shenobia Webster, who is joining us virtually. These are our online field faculty team. And then on campus, we have our Associate Director, Jeff Echek. On campus, we have Adusu Bailey. That's a double wave. We have Julianne Foster. Rob Lieberman. Lori Longs-Painter. Did I get everyone? And I'm Nicole Parker. Thank you. Thank you very much. This team is just incredible. I'm just so honored to work with them every day. All right, now for the fun part. We have the honor of celebrating 2 very special awards today. The Outstanding Field Instructor Award and brand new this year, the Outstanding Practicum Organization Award, both of which are nominated by our very own students of the Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences. We're going to start with the Outstanding Practicum Award Organization Award. Now, keeping in mind that we have partnerships with over 1,000 organizations, it was pretty hard to narrow down this award to just one organization. So after surveying all students and asking them to nominate a practicum organization which fits the criteria that I'm going to read to you in just a minute, we decided on 4 very deserving organizations to win this Outstanding Practicum Organization Award. The criteria of the Outstanding Practicum Organization is as follows. The Outstanding Practicum Organization Award recognizes organizations that have invested in the growth and development of Mandel School social work students and recognizes the importance of helping students integrate the classroom and practicum learning. Organizations nominated for this award provide a variety of progressively advancing learning opportunities to continuously support students' learning and professional development. We'd like to invite our 3 students to the front who nominated this year's Outstanding Practicum Organizations Award recipients. First, I'd like to invite Pranit Lanjawar to the front of the room. Pranit is a first-year on-campus MSW student. Hi, Pranit. Oh, here.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Dean Parker. It's my pleasure to award St. Herman House of Cleveland as an outstanding field practicum organization. Here is why I nominated St. Herman House. Hello everyone, my name is Pranit Lanjavar. I'm a first-year MSA student at Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences here at Case Western Reserve University. So currently my field placement is St. Herman Focus Cleveland, also known as St. Herman House of Hospitality, which is a non-profit organization mainly runs on charity, fundings, and donations from the people across the city. So we serve homeless population, specifically homeless men, services including shelter beds. So 28 people reside in the main shelter home and 12 people reside in the transitional home under certain program. We also provide meals 3 times a day. Every day we provide clothing 3 times a week. Then we provide hygiene kits, telephone services, and food bags. There is a case management work in place. Mary Ellen Jordan is a case manager who works with residents and assists them in filling out the application for Section 8 subsidized housing program, then rapid rehousing program, and the permanent supporting housing. She also provides counseling sessions and support group to the residents. As we know, most of the unhoused people are isolated, and providing them support groups are very beneficial because they have the opportunity to become socialized and engage with other community folks. She also signs vouchers for birth certificate, state ID, and driving license. The organization also provides bus passes to the residents. St. Herman Focus makes sure that it fulfills the immediate needs of the community people as well as the residents. One of the strengths of the St. Herman House is the familiar environment within the shelter house, because residents voluntarily help in different tasks within the organization. The organization receives funds and donations from different stakeholders. The organization's long-term services have developed the trust among stakeholders as well as the community people. At the end, I would just say, let's come together to empower the unhoused population towards their betterment and well-being in the life. Thank you. Thank you so much. I would love to welcome my organization's director, Mr. Paul Finley, to join me here and receive the award.
Thank you very much. Means an awful lot.
Yeah.
You gave it over in the picture.
Yes.
So, can I say 2 seconds?
Oh, absolutely, sure.
Well, I just want you to know that Prannett has made this school very proud. And Prannett, you have made us proud. And, it's a double-edged opportunity when we have an intern, because he has helped us help more people in so many ways. So you really deserve as much credit for this, and I am receiving it on behalf of our licensed independent social worker, Mary Ellen Jordan, who couldn't be here today, but she deserves all the credit for working so well with Prannett and with the university. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you mind staying up here, please? Because we're going to get a group picture afterwards. You can just stand over there. Thank you. All right, congratulations. Next, I'd like to invite Julian Foster to read a statement on behalf of a student to announce our next recipient of the Outstanding Practicum Award, Outstanding Practicum Organization Award. Julian?
Thank you, Nicole. I am here to represent Ariana Bay, who is a first-year MSW student in the intensive weekend program, and she is joining us virtually today. Ariana wrote the following statement about her practicum site, Project Lift. Project Lift Behavioral Center is inclusive and distinguished in the mental health arena. The organization is known for taking action and empowering people to healing by focusing on complete health and wellness. Miss Logan knows her craft, which allows her to impart a wealth of knowledge and combined practices to future social workers. I'm excited to name Project Lift as an Outstanding Practicum Organization Award recipient. To receive this award, I invite Corin Freeman, Program Assistant and Intake Specialist, Shashay Jones, Community Outreach Coordinator, and Ariana's Field Instructor and the Executive Director of Project Lift, Latoya Logan.
Congratulations. Next, I'd like to invite Kate Guditz up to the front. Kate is a first-year on-campus MSW student who's going to introduce our next recipient.
I'm already crying. I feel so thankful to be here. So, pardon.
We're not supposed to hug students, but it's okay.
I love Crossroads. So it's my pleasure to award Crossroads Hospice and Palliative Care as an outstanding practicum organization. Let's watch a video as to why I chose this organization.
Working as an intern at Crossroads Hospice and Palliative Care proved to be one of the greatest periods of my life. As an organization, Crossroads serves hundreds of patients each day, all in an effort to provide quality end-of-life care. While that task alone is no small feat, Crossroads also wants to help train the next generation of hospice social workers. Despite Crossroads' many admirable traits, the characteristic that makes Crossroads outstanding is their deep commitment to their interns. For 10 months, I carried around a little blue notebook, and inside were countless questions, interactions, and thoughts that I would need to debrief at a later date. Whether it was my task supervisor, my supervisor, or my social work buddy, no one batted an eye when I whipped out my book to tell them what I had learned during my time in the community that week. Then, as I began to feel myself outgrow my current roles and responsibilities, I asked my supervisor, Pam, for more patience on my caseload. Without hesitation, she ensured my caseload would grow as she not only entrusted my budding abilities, but valued my innate desire to continuously be challenged. Lastly, and most importantly, Crossroads listens to the perspectives of their interns. One day, after silently evaluating Crossroads' intern training plan, I asked Pam's permission to create an intern manual. Nervous that my evaluations would be perceived as invasive, Pam let out a big smile. She not only recognized potential areas for development and intern training, but she saw my eagerness to facilitate change, and she vocalized that good leaders listen to everyone, not just paid employees. Over the course of this year, I was valued, respected, and looked out for by the staff at Crossroads, and I only hope that more Case Western students find themselves donning Crossroads green. I believe that green will run through my veins for the entirety of my career as a social worker, thanks to the wonderful experience I was given. For that, the Outstanding Practicum Organization Award is one that Crossroads has undoubtedly earned.
So it's with my honor. Oh my goodness, this is so embarrassing. I love Crossroads to invite Pamela Ritchie McLean, my field instructor, to the front to receive this award on behalf of Crossroads Hospice and Palliative Care.
Here, you give it to her.
Thank you. Here you go, Pam. Oh.
You too. Oh, congratulations. Glasses. Okay. You guys okay? Anybody have tissues? You guys are cute. Okay, finally, I'd like to invite Anju Kotwani, who is a second year, did I get that right? I think Kotwani, yes, I did, okay. Who is a second year on-campus MSW student to introduce the fourth and final Outstanding Practicum Organization recipient.
Good morning, everyone. And I'm pleased to announce Magnolia Clubhouse as an Outstanding Practicum Organization Award recipient. And while my speech is not as great as Kate's or Pranit's, but whatever it is, it has a heart into it because I learned that Magnolia Clubhouse puts heart and soul in their work. And here's the video. Congratulations to Magnolia Clubhouse on receiving Outstanding Practicum Organization Award. I was glad that I completed my first year field placement at Magnolia Clubhouse. And what makes this place unique is that it offers a wide variety of experiences to interns, whether you want to work in individual therapy or in a group setting. This is a perfect place. You have the freedom to shadow even the administrative and billing department to see how the administrative side of social work is taken care of, learning all the HIPAA laws and ethics while signing the release of information. So it was a wonderful experience for me. And also the fact that I was able to see how recovery-oriented approach and strength-based model, which is the Clubhouse model, is being implemented, and it focuses on the functional recovery of individuals with severe mental illnesses. And I was fortunate to see and work with those clients, also called members, and they were part of Clubhouse. They are valued and treated as a part of Clubhouse. If you go to the Clubhouse, you can see them working in the kitchen or maybe in the reception area or in the enrollment department or even the administrative and billing section. So this was a wonderful experience for me, and I saw all the clients at their varying stages of recovery, and it was really the success of this model that not only focuses on the clinical symptoms, but also on their overall social and cognitive development. I congratulate Magnolia Clubhouse again on receiving this award. Thank you. So now I would like to invite the Executive Director, Dr. Lori D'Angelo, Chief Clinical Officer, Angel Chapin, and my former field instructor, Laura Williamson.
Come. Thank you. All right, now thank you. That's a surprise, right? So if we can just stay up for one group photo of all of the winners, that'd be great. You can come right here. Maybe we should bring these photos over. We can stand in between the balloons. How's that?
He's got it. Let me do it.
Oh, you're on mute.
All right. Congratulations, everyone. Next, I'd like to introduce two of our field faculty advisors from our online MSW program, Susan Snyder and Dr. Angela Whitten, to present the 2023 Outstanding Field Instructor Award. Drum roll. Ooh, here we go.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to go off script and just tell you that I flew all the way from Portland, Oregon for this event because we love our field instructors. We asked our students to describe their field instructors in a few words, and here's the result that we put into a word cloud. Several of these descriptors appeared in multiple students' nominations, including dedication, understanding, generous, compassionate, passionate, transparent, altruistic, supportive, and energetic. The Outstanding Field Instructor Award was first instituted in 2007. This year marks the 17th year we've celebrated an outstanding field instructor. We surveyed all of our students and asked them to nominate a field instructor who fits this criteria. The Outstanding Field Instructor Award recognizes one individual for their incredible work, as well as their commitment to students and to the future of the social work profession. Field instructors are the social workers in organizations who work to help students apply classroom theory to the realities of today's service delivery challenges, develop their professional skills, and grow their identities as professional social workers. Out of the over 250 active field instructors, the following were nominated for the 2023 Outstanding Field Instructor Award. As Angie reads your name, please stand so that you can be recognized, and if we could hold our applause till the end, that would be great.
Brianna Adamson of Belfair, Carter Dodesy of Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas, Sharon Ferry of Lafayette County Human Services, Gulnar Friesta of LGBT Community Center of Greater Cleveland, Maureen Heffernan of Work It Health, Rachel Humphrey from Beachbrook, DeGolia Johnson from Always Away Counseling, Angela Sandom from Montefiore Home, Latoya Logan from Project Lift, Pat McCaffrey Green from Cass Community Social Services, Alenda Phillips from Euclid City Schools, Natalie Smith from Ravenwood, Laura Williamson from Magnolia Clubhouse, and Dale Young from Northern Ohio Recovery Association. And we are thrilled to announce that the 2023 Outstanding Field Instructor Award winner is Gulnar from LGBTQ Center.
Gulnar was nominated by two students who were unable to attend today's event. Both students wanted to share their sentiments for Gulnar. First is the nomination from Ray Jackson, a second-year MSW student placed at the LGBT Community Center of Greater Cleveland. When I first met with Gulnar, they asked me about what I wanted to do for my specialized field placement. I told them that I either wanted to help with an existing life skills program or I would like to create one through an organization. Gulnar then said, "Why don't you come to the center and do it then?" From there, Gulnar let me take this idea and run with it. They have been an incredible support for me as they guided me through the design phase and the challenges that come with the implementation phase. They were there to support me and my mental health and well-being, especially through times when the program was not going very well. Gulnar recognizes that we are not just students, but we are people who are navigating through our personal and professional lives, and she tries her best to support us. I wouldn't have been able to develop as much as I have as a social work professional without them. Thank you, Ray, for those words. Next, we'll play a video recording from Tara Teschke, a first-year
Hi, my name
MSW student in our intensive weekend program who also nominated Gulnar.
Go. Hi, my name is Tara Teschke. I'm a first-year student in the Weekend Intensive MSW program, and I have the privilege of having Gulnar Farasta as my field instructor. Gulnar is the Senior Director of Programs at the LGBT Community Center of Greater Cleveland, and she is goals. From work in study and research in the fields of the foster care system, cancer disparities, and gender-affirming care in the LGBTQIA2S+ community, Gulnar is a disruptor and she is a force. I consider myself so lucky to be in a position to learn from her. I feel that in any situation, give Gulnar the mic. They are the fearless leader that we all need. Those are just a few of the reasons that I nominated her for Outstanding Field Instructor.
Thank you, Tara. And do we want to do a photo, or did you do it?
Oh, yes. Well, and also, Gulnar, we also would like to invite you to attend commencement on May 19th, where Dean Wasan will present you with a special gift.
Phyllis, would you like to come up and take a picture as well? Okay, come on up.
Can you take one of this? How about one of just these two? No, please. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Congratulations. Thank you very much. All right, congratulations to Gulner Project Lift, Crossroads Hospice and Palliative Care, Magnolia Clubhouse, and St. Herman's Focus Cleveland. And thank you to everyone for all you do to support our students. Without you, none of this would be possible. So thank you so much. All right, next up, you all are in for a treat with Dr. Wilkes. He's going to take his shoes off. That's how he teaches best. It's true. All right, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Scott Wilkes. He is the Assistant Dean for Academic Affairs at the Jack Joseph and Morton Mendel School of Applied Social Sciences. He previously held the position of the Director of Field Education at the Mendel School from 2011 to 2015. He was in my role. He has more than 15 years of experience working in the area of child welfare and served as the Vice President of Corporate Development with the National Foster Care Agency. Dr. Wilkes was appointed by Governor Mike DeWine to serve as a member of the Ohio Counselor, Social Work, and Marriage and Family Therapy Licensing Board. The 3-year appointment afforded him the ability to shape professional licensing policies and procedures on a state level. In just 3 months after being appointed to the WMFT board, he accepted the role of the chair of the Social Work Professional Standards Committee. In that leadership capacity, he chaired the biannual social work meetings and served as the voting delegate for the Association of Social Work Boards, ASWB, annual meetings. In 2021, he was elected as the board chair of the Ohio Licensing Board. He was subsequently reappointed after another 3-year term as board member in 2022. Scott is also an active member of the Association of Social Work Boards. He received an appointed to join the 2021 class of ASWB examination item writers. Additionally, he also accepted an invitation to serve as ASWB Social Work Workforce Coalition. Please welcome my colleague and friend, Dr. Scott Wilkes.
Well, here we go. Hello. Hey. Oh, wow. I'm on. Wow. For now. Okay, what am I doing? Oh, the green button? Yep. Cool beans, thanks. All right, thanks. I think so. Hi. Welcome. Oh, this mic is really, really hot. It sounds okay? Oh, it sounds really hot to me. Welcome, everyone, and thanks again for being here. I'm happy to be here. Now for the ethics, the dry ethics section. I do want to say thanks, how much we appreciate the field instructors and also the adjuncts who are in the room. Everything that we do all year couldn't be done without you. You are kind of like an engine that drives this machine for sure. And our students really appreciate it. So I'm happy to be here. Adjunct instructors will also be recognized at the commencement ceremony. So that's where we officially do that session. All right, so we're going to talk about ethics. I got 2 hours. I think we're a little bit behind, but we're going to try to stay with the 2 hours. And my mind's just not working right until we get to that point. Okay, now I'm feeling a little bit better. All right, so I'm putting this together when Nicole asked me to do this and working it through, because I've done ethics trainings in the past, but I haven't done them in ages. So it's been a good time since I've been here. And so I wanted to twist it a little bit and think about something differently. And so as I was putting it together, my mind kept going back to one place over and over and over again. And so let's start with where I'm at, right? Start with the client. Start with where I'm at, what I was thinking. And what I kept going back to was Abraham Flexner. Odd reference, Abraham Flexner. Anyone familiar with who Abraham Flexner is? Show of hands? Couple? Just a couple. Okay, Abraham Flexner in 1915 was invited by a group of social workers in New York City to be the keynote speaker in front of social workers. And he stood up and said, basically, social work is not a profession. Not at all. How dare you call yourselves a profession? And just because you offer a degree or consider offering a degree doesn't make a profession, right? Doesn't make it so. And it lacked the scientific rigor and or the history that the medical fields and law fields, and even preaching was the word he used, had, which could legitimize it as a profession. But social work was clearly not a profession. And I was thinking about the people in the room. First of all, he was probably never invited back again. But thinking about the response of the people in the room and how they might have felt that they were at a crossroads in their profession, in defining, well, not a crossroads per se, more like a defining moment. Crossroads kind of connotes a choice of pathways. It really wasn't a choice of pathways because there was only one. But it connoted perhaps a defining moment for the profession in determining who we are. And I reflect back to that in 1915. That was in May of 1915. As a side note, that same year, December 1915, just a few months later, is when this school was founded. The school was founded in 1915, graduated our first class in 1918, was accredited, I believe, in 1916. But the people in that room and thinking about who we are as a profession struck me because I think we're at a similar point with our profession today. There's a lot going on, right? A lot going on. When you think about the social justice awakening that we're experiencing coming out of the pandemic, we're experiencing an environment that is significantly and rapidly changing with technological advances. And I think we're equally at a defining moment to determine not whether or not we're a profession, because we clearly are, right? We have national competencies. We have established research in the field. We have proven clinical methodologies. We have, you get what I'm saying, right? So we have all these things that legitimizes us as a profession, but somehow it feels like we've been trying to justify ourselves over the past 100 years that we belong. And I still feel that from time to time, and maybe you do as well. Whether or not we're a legitimate profession, we clearly are. But at the defining moment, and how do we move forward with all these additional challenges that we're facing? So that's what I want to talk about. That's how I'm going to frame ethics with that in mind. Who are we? And what then is your role as social work educators, whether that be the classroom or the field placement experience, the field placement sites? What is your role in defining who we are and who we're going to be moving forward with all of these challenges? So we'll talk about what those challenges are. I don't know how many people we have online, but I want to say hello to the people who are Zooming in or online. How many do we have? 50 people. Great. Welcome. I'm glad you're here as well. And we have about maybe 80 people, 70 people in the room, which is kind of cool. So we're going to try to make this as interactive as we possibly can throughout. But here's what we're going to deal with today. So I want to talk about the theoretical construction of social work, help students examine external and internal threats to the profession, help students understand and explore the distinction between ethical dilemmas and ethical violations. We'll introduce a new model, decision-making model, and hopefully we'll work through some scenarios defining what we mean by professional and civil liability. So for the reflective learners in the room, we'll have moments of reflection to think about. For the intellectual learners in the room, we'll throw out some theory. And for our practical learners, hopefully we'll do some applications. So hopefully we're going to incorporate everyone's learning style and get everyone involved in some respects. So let me start with a little quiz, just off the top of your heads, right? The purpose of the Code of Ethics, right? The code itself defines 6 purposes of the Code of Ethics. You've all been around for a while. Give me one. What do you think? Or just off the top of your head, what do you think are what's a purpose of the Code of Ethics? Why do we have it? Go ahead. Protect clients from harm. Great. Give me another one. Oh, we got a mic because, yeah, perfect. Awesome.
Social workers challenge social injustice.
Okay, challenge social justice, injustice. Back there in the orange.
I look at them as guiding principles for interacting with clients.
Okay, guiding principles, great. Anybody else? 6 things. Yeah. Behave in a trustworthy manner. Yeah, absolutely. Those are all rooted in the core values, which we'll show in a second. But yeah, it introduces us to the core values. It determines the standard of care. It is a way for the public to hold us accountable for what we do. It helps us, gives us a sense of the guiding principles of our profession, the guiding ethical principles of our profession. My favorite is it helps socialize new social workers to the field, right? It helps us socialize new. So if you want to know who we are, we look to the Code of Ethics because it does all of those things, setting the standard of care and telling us what our core values are. What I like to think of it, though, as well, are it tells us what the rules and regulations are, just simply straight out, the do's and don'ts of the profession, right? The do's and don'ts of the profession. It also sets that standard of care, and it also helps us resolve ethical issues. All 3 of those things together, I think ultimately where I think the purpose of the Code of Ethics is if you look at everything in its totality, it is an effective risk management strategy. Hence the title, Practicing Safe, Practicing Smart. It keeps us safe. It keeps our clients safe. It keeps workers safe. It keeps agencies safe. It keeps communities safe, right? It's an effective risk management strategy. And when we stray away from our ethical obligations, that's where we put everyone at great risk, however you define risk, whether that's liability risk or financial risk or clinical risk, whatever it may be. When we stray away, we have that. So the code is to really help us understand what our duties and responsibilities are in order to maintain safety. I want to talk about the source of ethical theory. And I debated back and forth whether to put this in, take it out, put it in, take it out. And so I decided to keep it in because I think it frames a little bit of where we're going. And that is, how do we define ethics? What's the source of our ethical code? Where does it come from? How do we know what we know, right? So there are 2 primary ways to think of it. One is an objective standard. How do we know what is right and wrong from an objective standard? There's an absolute truth to what is right and wrong. There's an absolute truth to our ethical code. The other is more subjective, constructivism, right? There is no absolute truth. It all depends, right? It all depends. There is a debate, I think his name is David Sherwood and Frederick Reamer. You know Frederick Reamer? The names sound familiar with respect to ethics. He's a scholar on social work ethics and has written extensively on it. And he is more in the constructivist camp that says our ethical responsibility is based solely, well, not solely, but simply on rational humanism. Just the mere fact that we're human, we relate to one another, we kind of know how we should treat other people based upon how we ourselves want to be treated. And that changes, right? That changes in terms of the human dynamic, the human relationship. As opposed to David Sherwood, who says, no, that's not good enough. If we all had to be really honest, our ethical code comes from something more established, and that is the loving, I gotta get the words, let me get the words correct. Moral obligation is rooted in the loving and just nature of God. That is a divinity, right? 10 Commandments. God tells us what is right and wrong. That is absolute. It is fixed. There's no arguing it. It doesn't change. That's how we know what is right and wrong. Versus a constructivist philosophy that says we create what's right and wrong as we go along. As society changes, as the situation dictates, that determines the relative merits of rightness and wrongness. I've clearly always been in the constructivist camp. And just recently I've been thinking about, what are the challenges of being in a constructivist camp? There are challenges in terms of, if it changes, how does it change? Who determines the change? When does it change? Because it may change in ways and directions that we may not like, or we may not anticipate, or that we may not have a voice in. And is it better to have it rooted and fixed so we know exactly what it is? It's a really interesting philosophical debate when you think about it. Constructivism, I think, is more relevant and probably more in keeping with our social work values, but it also has its challenges. That it may spin in a direction that we don't necessarily intend it to spin. And are we okay with that? Maybe we are, maybe we're not. But it's interesting to think about. As I go along, if you have thoughts and or comments or questions, just shoot them out there, all right? Let's talk about this stuff. All right, so if we look at the core values, and if we look at it from a constructivist view, here they are. I give you the social work professional values. These are the core values in the Code of Ethics. They're in the preamble. But I also give you the principles of biomedical ethics, except for the last one, veracity, which is not necessarily in the medical field, as a comparison. Because our students are experiencing interprofessional education, they're teaming with members of the medical, dental, nursing, physician assistants, speech-language pathology, psychologists. Our on-campus students are experiencing a year-long program where they team up with other professionals in terms of how to be more engaged in collaborative practice, because we don't work in a vacuum. We don't work on an island. We're always teaming with some other profession. We are in the process of building that out for our intensive weekend and online students as well, so they also have the same experience. So I put this up as a comparison to see what the values are of those professions. But when you look at our professions and you think of it as from a constructivist point of view, service, right? The goal of helping people and or tackling social problems. That's not always been so clear, right? Who do we serve? Why do we serve them? How do we define a social problem? That changes, right? What might be a social problem for one may not be a social problem for another. And it might not be a social problem over a period of time. It changes, right? When we think about social justice, that term has become highly politicized. and isn't always what we think it is. And what's interesting about social justice is whatever argument you make for a specific population or a specific group of people, there is probably also a very compelling and equal argument on the other side, right? So if you just take the abortion debate, right? There are those who are strongly rooted in the rights of a woman to choose, to have autonomy over her own body. While people on the other side who are fighting as vigorously for the rights of the unborn child, right? Those are in conflict with one another. Where is the social justice issue? It's not a lock on one side or the other. Whether or not you believe that there should be greater gun restrictions versus those who believe we cannot infringe on our fundamental rights of being able to, our constitutional fundamental rights. That to give that up is just as scary as what we're living in now. And we can look at other countries and see models where governments turn on people if they are not armed. Two equally compelling arguments. Should we be spending money in Ukraine for Ukraine's war versus should we be spending that money more on domestic issues? You name it. There's always an interesting, compelling argument to make on the other side. And so the whole notion of social justice isn't always as clear cut. It changes. Dignity and worth of a person. Historically, there have been populations that we, individually and as a profession, have largely ignored and have not respected in any sense. And those challenges exist today, where certain populations are not respected and helped in a manner in which others might think they should be. That changes. The importance of human relationships, how we relate to one another, that is changing. That is significantly changing with the advent of the new technologies that are emerging, the whole notion of social media, how we relate to one another is definitely not what it used to be. I was in a meeting the other day, in an interprofessional meeting, and someone said, when we think about interdisciplinary teams and how we relate to each other as professionals, we need to even start thinking about how AI is a member of that team. Right? AI is going to be a member of that team, and how we relate and or incorporate that in to our decision making is a significant challenge for not only our profession, but for many professions. Integrity. The whole notion of how do we police ourselves in knowing that we are doing the right thing? Right? The whole notion of how we police ourselves and knowing that we are doing the right thing, the integrity. Social work is a profession that, by and large, we manage ourselves in terms of the work we do. There is a level of supervision, but at some point, we're out there alone with the client, and who knows what that interaction is like. And even in saying that, how do we police ourselves? Talking about constructivism, the language is changing. Right? When I say that, when I say that or think that terminology, policing ourselves, anybody take offense to that term? Policing ourselves and how that might change? The connotation of policing from a social justice perspective might change, right? All the words that we're so traditionally used to might be changing. Another example is the whole notion of field education itself. Do we say the term field in the connotation that may have in the legacy of slavery in our country? So from a constructivist point of view, things change, even our language, right? And then competence. How do we measure competence? How do we measure competence? What's your role in measuring competence? How do we define what that even is? And is it changing? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So here are some threats. When I talk about we're at a pivotal point in our profession, here are some of the major overarching issues that I think challenge our profession today. The first one being neoliberalism, right? There is a shift in our country towards conservatism. We're shifting to the right. And that has major implications on what we do as a profession and who we are. I don't know if you're experiencing it, but even our students are coming to the classrooms, they're coming to field education, they're coming to the profession from a more right-leaning perspective. Do you experience that? Has anyone experienced that? I heard a yes, right? Our country is shifting, and so what does that mean for us when we think about it? And is there room for ideological diversity? Right? On a very practical sense, a neoliberal perspective focuses on the shrinking role of government. So resources devoted to social services may be cut, right? So it has real practical implications on the work that we do, right? There are eroding civil protections. When the federal government steps away from protecting our civil liberties, right? With the Supreme Court decision with Roe v. Wade, we're seeing that. We're seeing that civil protections for the LGBTQIA plus community eroding. And we see a push towards devolution, which is the federal government stepping away from their overarching responsibility and saying, we're going to leave it up to the states. And so when we see that, we see a patchwork then, right? Some do, some don't. Some is protected here, not protected there. We can think of the same with voting rights. Also, the federal government stepping away and leaving up to the states to decide. So we're seeing this shift, this ideological shift, what I think is very challenging for the profession in terms of the practical implications, as well as the challenges that we have in working with individuals and or social workers who have a different ideological perspective. And do we entertain that? And how do we reconcile being on opposite ends of how we define what social justice is? A very real challenge for us. Managerialism. This has always been around. Our students and or line workers, direct care workers, have always talked about the challenge between clinical practice and productivity, right? That tension that they experience. Managerialism, the emphasis to rely more on business philosophies, business practices, for-profit practices in the management of nonprofit organizations. It is increasing. I was in class this past semester, and I used an example of a productivity standard of 52%, which is what I remember it being when I was in practice. So it's been a few years, and the students said, no, we're at 60%. 60%. So it's creeping up, and it's really interesting to think 60% of your time being in direct billable service leaves very little margin for everything else. And so we're getting out of balance, right? When you think that perfect balance, and I call it the best practice trilogy, the perfect balance of how you manage the tension between productivity and clinical skill is equal parts, 3 parts, right? There's the clinical practice, that's the third. There's productivity, that's the third. And then there's compliance, right? The paperwork requirements. There should be equal parts of all 3. And where there is an equal balance of all 3, you're going to have best practices. But when one starts cutting into the other, yes, it does then create, right, risk of not really being able to deliver good clinical care. I mean, 60%. There's barely enough time to go to the bathroom. It's 60%. So it's really interesting to think about the eroding practices of clinical care, and then the focus on performance indicators. How do we measure the work that you're doing? Is the work measured by how much revenue you are generating? And so on some level, our clinicians become technicians, diagnostic technicians, just going through the motions in order to feed the bottom line rather than providing good clinical care. Those are really interesting ethical challenges that we are facing. The next one, individualism, a shift towards personal values. I don't know if it's generational, I don't know, but the tendency to think what I value matters. What I personally value matters more than what is in the best interest of my client. We're seeing that, right? We're seeing this tension. And so the whole notion of self-determination, if you have self-determination, then I as a clinician also have self-determination. And so at what point do my needs and my values become more important than yours? It is a balance that I think we're probably finding is getting out of line. I talk with a colleague all the time about how do we support our students? To what degree do we support our students in terms of their accommodations, in terms of their individual needs in order to make it through the program? And I think, is there a limit to that? Is there a limit to how far do we go between support, enable, right? Where is that balance to say, when do we start holding you accountable in spite of your needs for the sake of the needs of others? And if we go too far, right, then we cut into what are considered best practices in supporting our clients, because my needs reign supreme. And we're seeing evidence of this in terms of individual values of the clinician or a clinician, not necessarily social work clinician, but we're seeing more and more conscientious objection statutes popping up across the country, right? We're seeing that. It is actually law today in Ohio that a medical practitioner, or I'm going to say a medical practitioner, not necessarily a doctor, because it could include social workers, nurses, any kind of practitioner, is protected under the law if they refuse treatment for a client because of their moral or religious objections. Now, that is clearly putting your own self-interest before the client. So the whole notion, I forget that the Supreme Court case, Masterpiece Cake. Masterpiece, is that it? Masterpiece versus Colorado. Right? That's where one of the more famous cases, you all know that case, yes, about the wedding cake. The wedding cake owner, right, was that, I'm not serving these people. I'm not making a wedding cake for a member of the LGBT community. I'm not doing it. And so they sued, and it was upheld that they had every right. So religious freedom is overtaking our professional obligation. That's a significant challenge for our profession, right? And then the last, professionalism, a shift away from professionalism. We're seeing increasingly, because all of these things are kind of related, we're seeing the criminalization of what we do, particularly around the LGBT community and transgender rights. We're seeing it also with, what's the other one? So I'm thinking of transgender rights and of abortion rights, right? That you could be jailed, perhaps, by providing services. We're seeing that across the country. So clinical practices that we would typically engage in are now becoming at risk of being criminalized. And that's a significant concern. The other is, how are we measuring competence? How do we measure competence of social workers? And so I'll ask you, as educators, how do you measure competency? And/or people online, how do you measure competency? How do you know? What are some of the metrics that we use in order to measure competency? Yeah.
Simply just putting everything into practice. You know, your ability to put everything we learn into practice.
Okay.
You know, putting the code of ethics into practice.
Yeah. So the incorporation of all of the values in the code and making sure that that's actually being adhered to.
Right.
Okay.
And along with the theme of everything else, you know, how we measure someone's competence is going to ultimately be subjective.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's very subjective if you take it from a constructivist point of view.
Old-fashioned way, process recording, video recording,
Yeah.
viewing,
Yeah.
rating
Right.
for adherence coding.
Yeah. Great. Great. Over here.
That old word, outcomes.
Outcomes.
Right, you know, whether or not we're able to
Okay.
move entities from one place to another, how effective we are at that.
Right. Or how our clients progress, whether they get better, just simply how that they get better. From a practitioner's point of view, that is the ultimate measure rather than the bottom line. We all have a role to play when it comes to measuring competency. There are actually three levels within the social work profession. There are 3 levels, 3 pillars, institutional pillars that work together in order to measure competence. One is an NASW, right? Those represent practitioners. Practitioners, I'm not going to spell that right. You know what I'm saying. Practitioners, right? And we do that. You measure it in the field, right? Performance evaluations, right? Learning contracts, right? How well the agencies perform, clinical measures, right? All those are indicators, right, of competence. So that was a good one. There's also the organization, I'm going to say ASWB, right? Those represent regulators. How do they measure competency? Well, they measure competency through a licensing exam, right? They measure competency through a licensing exam. And then the third pillar is CSWE, which represents educators. And they measure competency by, number one, establishing those standards, right? Establishing the standards for social work schools, defining what that is, and defining then what the standard of care is for students to graduate, right? How do we measure that in an educational setting? So all 3 of these play a role. Interestingly, one of the measures of competency is the licensing exam, and that is under scrutiny. Are you aware of this? Some of you are? Yes? No? Okay, right? So there is the perception and or the belief that the licensing exam is racially biased, right? That it is not an accurate measure of competency, and it is disproportionately skewed against people of color and age as well, right? So much so that at one point, NASW officially has come out and said, we do not support having a licensing exam. If that is a measure of competency, it is at risk of being an objective measure of competency. Now, whether or not the exam is indeed a cause of disproportionality or a symptom, I think further research will bear that out. We don't know, but there's calls for alternative measures of competency. How do we measure that if it's not through an objective exam? Maybe it's through some other subjective measurement. And is that good enough? Will that be sufficient in order to determine competency within our profession? So it's really interesting to think about those pivotal moments of where we're at, where we have two major pillars of the social work profession somewhat at odds over this issue. Just so you know, because I wrote it down, what are those rates, right? What are the disproportionate rates? They are striking, right? They are striking. So if you look at between 2018 to 2021, and you look at master's level exams, eventually passing, right? Not first time, but ultimately passing, right? For whites, that passage rate is 91%. For people of mixed race background, it's 85%. For people of Asian descent, it's 75%. Of people of Native American descent, it's 72%. For Latinos, it's 71%. And for blacks, it's 52%. So it drops precipitously, right? From whites at 91% to blacks at 52%. That's significant. We see the same progression or regression, if we look at age categories from 18 to 29 to 50 plus. We see a drop-off. So there are threats to our profession in terms of how we measure competency, what that looks like, how should we, what role we play in doing so. Thoughts or questions? Yeah. Oh, we need to, hold on. I'm going to come and lean in. All right, go ahead.
I was just wondering, because it is such a huge difference, if there was explanation to that more than bias.
Yeah, I mean, it's still being explored. When I say is it a symptom of the racial inequities that exist in our society, and they're just being played out at the exam level? We're just seeing it? Or is the exam itself biased in and of itself? I think further research and exploration will tell, but it's really interesting to think that, is it this or that? Perhaps that's a false dichotomy. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's both. And we need to examine then, what do we as a profession, how do we respond to that? I got a comment back here, and then over here I saw as well. Chelsea, I think, had her hand up. You want to stay with Chelsea since you're there, and then we'll come over here.
So I can't recall, because it's been a while, how many years ago the exam changed and how many years ago our state changed with when you could actually take the exam.
What do you mean changed? The exam changed?
I want to say like maybe the late 2000s, you could still take the exam straight out of your master. Somebody's.
Ah. Okay, so that's not this. So that's the level of exam that you can take. Yeah, that here in Ohio, you could have sat for the LISW. Excuse me, hold on. You could have sat for the exam, the LISW exam, your 2 years postmaster's exam earlier on. I don't think that's a great question. I don't think that factors in. Because now we eliminated that, so master's level students are taking the BSW exam rather than that advanced clinical exam. Even still, I would imagine that the rates would have been, right, it would have been the same. That's a great question, though.
Given that rate of a percentage for African Americans passing the exam, so what are they going to do about it? Because it explains in the study guide that the different cultures, how the language is up and one language is down. I forget the particular words that was used, but in the study guide, they explain this very thing, how the test is written. And I'm one of those who went back to school as a mature student and have not passed that test, but I made that L work for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that I'm blocking your question. What was your initial question?
What were you going to do about that percentage of African Americans not
Okay,
passing that exam?
we don't know yet. We don't know yet. There's discussion as to are there alternative methods to determining competency beyond an objective exam. There are, the ASWDB does do psychometric testing to determine whether or not, full disclosure, I'm an exam writer. I'm writing those exam questions. Is there bias in those questions, right? Is there bias in those questions? It goes through rigorous testing, psychometric testing, in order to determine whether or not that item does have a differential, they call it a diff, whether there's a differential in how different populations respond. If there is, it's pulled out. And so only the items remain are cut across equal amongst all populations. Now, whether or not that's actually happening, that's another source of the debate, is how much do we test? How much do we trust the psychometric testing? Yeah, you're exactly right. There's so many different levels to competency, you're exactly right. Because the test is actually to measure your competency as a beginning social worker, just the entry into the field, not subsequent steps along the way, okay? Taiwaniki, you want to say something and we'll go here and then we'll move on.
Thank you.
Time.
So in hosting licensure prep study groups, a lot of the students come in, or a lot of the people testing say that they were told that the test questions, they have to think like an old white woman is taking the test. And I am so sorry, I've never been old or a white woman. I am a Black social worker. And so I need you to understand, this is what I teach them. I need you to understand that you have to be competent.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who they are saying if the test questions are written for or how you should think, but you have to be able to think as you to answer these questions.
Yeah, I've heard that same sentiment shared across the country. And that is very unfortunate. It's just very unfortunate. I'll leave it at that.
I'm just curious as to, you said 2018. I'm curious as if you've looked farther back at the testing, just because is it consistent over time? Just because I know when I graduated from MSAS, I was told, take the exam now.
Yeah. The longer you stay out,
Yeah,
the
your knowledge,
more likelihood that you are not going
Yeah.
to pass that test.
Your knowledge wanes.
And so consequently, you know, is this constant? Are you seeing this over time, those rates? Because again, I was a older adult learner.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, it was a hard exam, and I studied my bejeezers off. I passed it, but so I'm just curious about that. I don't know, because if you're out in the field, the logic is the longer you're out in the field, you interact.
Yeah, and that's a good point.
It changes your perspective, and so
Correct.
consequently it changes your.
And that should be the same for anyone taking the exam, right? That's race neutral. The longer you wait, your knowledge is gonna, right? The more practice experience you're gonna get, and that perhaps is gonna impact how you take the exam and how you answer questions. So I wanna move on, but these all are, right? When you think about it, all of these challenges from a systemic level are challenging our career. More discreet than that, on just an individual level, when you think about ethics and how we make ethical decisions, these are some other challenges, and I call them contextual factors. When you are making an ethical decision or even a clinical decision in the moment, it all depends on a number of factors: ecological, informational, ideological, and consequential factors. I actually call this the Jerry Sandusky effect. I'll explain in a minute. I know that's an odd reference, but you all know exactly who I'm talking about, right? Right? You all know exactly who I'm talking about. So let me walk you through this. So ecological factors. When you are making a decision at the time, that decision is impacted by, it's really systems theory, right? The environment in which that decision is being made, the agency context, how much information you have at the time or don't have at the time is based upon what you personally believe or not believe, your belief system, your perspective, your experience. That's going to factor in to that decision. And then the last one, the consequence, whether or not there's a competing agenda of your desire for avoiding a negative consequence or wanting a highly positive consequence. That factors in. All of those contexts sway your decision making, whether that's an ethical issue or not, right? Ethical and or clinical issue. Again, going back to a constructivist philosophy, it all depends. And how we determine the rightness and wrongness of that decision may be determined by these factors. Whether or not what the agency's position is, what your belief systems are, what information you had at the time. So it changes, right? Here's the Jerry Sandusky reference. So you all know I'm talking about Penn State and the sex abuse scandal. The board, and here's teaching ethics, where I'm coming from. When you're teaching ethics, when you're in a room like this, and imagine the board members for Penn State sitting in a room like this, taking an ethics training, and given a hypothetical example, if you were to discover that one of the staff members of your organization was sexually abusing children, how would you respond? A, call the authorities. B, do nothing. C, sweep it under the rug, right? You can imagine that context in an academic setting it out. My hypothesis is everyone would get that absolutely right, right? Without any context for making that decision, you're going to make the right decision. But the minute you take them out of this environment and put them into their environment, where they have to think about, okay, what are long-term implications of this? How are we going to lose our alumni base? How much money is the university? How are we going to deal with the media scandal? How, right? You put them in that context with all of these factors and forces now weighing upon that ultimate same decision that you would make in this room, the calculus changes. And to think that, are they any different than we are? I say not. I say that you put any one of us in that kind of decision with your factors, with your context, with your agency, we are likely to do the same thing. And I would suggest that perhaps we do that now, because that's just human nature of how we respond to our environment. But to be aware that that might be happening is a significant challenge for our profession. To think about our social work students and young social workers who might not be aware that that dynamic happens, especially given the last slide that I talked about, neoliberalism and individualism and a shift away from professionalism and my needs over their needs, and right, I somehow make decisions differently in a different context. It happens. These are all kinds of sources of ethical conflicts. The last one, being our own personal values, and I think we all have to wrestle with whether or not that's valid, right? Whether your own personal values should be taken into consideration, but organizational policies, licensing standards, accreditation standards, laws and regulations, the code itself, contractual obligations, all of those factor in on how we make decisions and determine the relative wrongness and rightness of our actions. It is neither possible nor desirable to be totally neutral with respect to your own personal values in a professional relationship, and to assume such can be ethically dangerous. Agree? Disagree? Yeah? I used to think that your own personal ethics was off the table. There was no place for it. I'm becoming more and more convinced they can't be off the table. They're always there, right? You can try to work around them, you're not gonna, right? But to the extent that we can acknowledge them, we must. So ethical decision making, we all know what this is, a step-by-step process. It helps us clarify values. It can help us build logic and rationality into our intuitive decisions, and it educates us in terms of how not only our decision, but external factors might then play into the ultimate outcome. I want to get to this slide because I want to set us up for a ethical scenario. So ethical distinctions. So in teaching students, if we are going to make ethical decisions and or be faced with ethical dilemmas, we have to see them when they exist and be able to recognize them. So one ethical dilemma is when we have two competing, right, values competing amongst one another. We have practice dilemma, not ethical tensions, but practice tensions that bump up against one another. Two decisions in a practice setting, right? You can either do alternative A or alternative B that conflict. How do you reconcile that, right? That's a practice dilemma, as distinguished from an ethical dilemma when we have two ethical principles bumping up against each other rather than just a decision. And then we have ethical violations, when you clearly violate a standard of the ethical code. Okay? Everybody got that? Those three levels. Okay? So let's put it to the test. All right. So in your packets, what you have is ethical scenario 1. I only want us to do the first one. And for everyone online, you are going to, do they have access to the Google Doc? Perfect. All right, you're going to have access to a Google Doc that's going to give you a case scenario that we are reading in the room. So one says, let me see, is it the yellow? No, it is the pink. You're going to work on the pink. So you're going to work through the first ethical scenario on the back. We're just going to do one, okay? Maximum impact. So you're going to read through maximum impact, and you're going to determine as a table whether or not you think that scenario represents an ethical dilemma, whether it represents a practice dilemma, or whether it represents an ethical violation. Okay? That's what you're going to do. Okay? Everybody got that? All right. Have at it. All right, let's reconvene real quick. Let's keep it rolling. All right, thanks for doing that. All right, so let me just okay. I'm waiting for the they have the countdown on Zoom, so they're coming back. So I gotta wait for the countdown. What are we at? 29 seconds. So I will say this, because this applies to only the people in the room. In your packets, you have 3 letters, A, B, or C. A representing an ethical dilemma, B representing a practice dilemma, and C representing an ethical conflict. That's what you were deciding, what it is. So one of those 3 letters. So not now, but when prompted to do so, with the stand, you're going to decide as a table, what is it? Okay? All right? Pardon me? Can you put all 3? I will, okay, I will. You have a D. Okay, so let me, in full are they back? Okay, in full disclosure, this is difficult. I mean, so, did you find it difficult? Yeah? We can talk about why that is. This is presented to our students as well. Scenarios such as this. And this is really a great strategy. This is a very real scenario. A very real scenario. Is based on actual, I mean, you all know that these things happen. But it is very challenging. All right, so let's talk about it. So we have for the people online, we are putting up a poll question. Are we ready? Oh, it won't project? Oh, okay. So the poll question is up. So for the people online, for one person in the group, I want you to decide what you are projecting. Boy, I wish everyone can see this. So we have, only one person per group. So we are doing, so right now, I won't tell you what they do. I'm going to have you do it, and we'll do that in a minute. Okay, so now I want you to post your response. Is it A, is it a B, or is it C? Just post your response on the chart. Just stick it right in the, you can stick it right in the little stand. There you go. And we're waiting for the table in the back, and they're looking around and seeing what everybody else is saying. Okay, so we have our answers up. And it almost looks like we're kind of almost split. Just a little. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So about a third. In the chat, we have, you want to say?
Yeah, it's neck and neck, according to the online participants. 50% for ethical dilemma, 47% for practice dilemma, 3% for ethical violation.
Okay, so we have no C's in the room, which is interesting. We had 3% C's online. Okay, who wants to justify their answer? Why do you see it? Let's say A, why do you see it as an ethical dilemma? A table want to share why they picked an ethical dilemma. What about this table over there? You go. Hold on, you got to wait for the mic.
Well, one of the concerns is it depends on where you sit. Are you sitting as the board president? Are you sitting as a board member? Or are you sitting as a practitioner? So we kind of looked at it a bit more from the board perspective without knowing exactly what the mission was. Is this a shift in mission, which could be an ethical violation? I mean, there's elements of all 3. But we primarily felt there really wasn't a process that described how ethical issues would be evaluated with such a major decision that exclusively shifts the population of focus. So the absence of any sort of ethical process context for such an important question kind of tilted us a bit more toward an ethical dilemma.
Okay. All right, so you needed more context in order to determine. Okay, but if you had, okay, I'll leave it at that. Okay, so B, want to justify their answer. Go ahead, right here. Angel, thanks. Hold on, you got to wait for the mic. for coming.
Thank you. I think what made it so hard for me is the Jerry Sandusky example, because sitting right here, right now, if I were in the executive director's position, that's not a question to me. If I'm serving my community, I think I'm doing a good job. I think I'm one of the few organizations that's providing this necessary service to this population. I wouldn't let somebody being the biggest funder sway me. But I think that that's easy to say sitting here in this classroom setting.
Great, that's a great point. But you came up ultimately with it not being an ethical dilemma, but you're saying it's a practice dilemma. From the perspective of Dr. Santoro, let me back to it, right? From the position of Dr. Santoro, where she sits, and this goes back to what David was explaining, depending upon the perspective, but from her perspective of what she's faced with in having to make that decision, you came up that because of the process, it's an ethical dilemma, and it's an ethical dilemma because of that, not necessarily based solely on the decision, right? Because if it's based solely on the decision, perhaps it's a different calculus. And you're saying from that position, making that decision, it is just a practice dilemma. Anybody else want to add to that? Go ahead from the chat. Great.
Yeah, we have some folks online who wanted to justify their selection. Rachel Humphrey from Beachbrook, she mentioned, we believe this is a practice dilemma, but with the ethical concerns coming from how they choose to transition the clients they have.
Great.
If they just close doors versus transition into other services available, it becomes an ethical violation.
Yeah, so the how, right? So we're speaking to the how.
Yep.
Okay.
Another one, Larry Heller from Nora. He mentioned our group decided it is a practice dilemma. We believe it to be more of a moral dilemma rather than an ethical dilemma. And along with that, Allison Black mentioned she agrees. What is the board process and how do they hold that one person accountable for what the role of the board is and the process for making major changes to organizational services? This is twofold, a funder and a board member who is the chair.
Okay, great. Context matters, right? The situation, the circumstances matter. That's a great point you make, David, because that will determine how you see these situations, which again suggest a constructivist philosophy rather than an absolute. There are really no absolutes, but there's definitely a danger in this. I'm going to say, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say I think it would be important to know how the agency's mission was created in the first place, because there's some companies that just a few people at the top make the mission for everybody, and there's a few rare companies around who let every employee have some say in the company's mission.
Yeah. That's a great suggestion, along with the how and the right. It would have been really teeny font if I had built all that in. So based on the scenario as it is written, it was written as a practice dilemma, solely a practice dilemma. Decisions like this are made all the time by organizations, which programs to operate, which ones not to operate. The rationale or the reasoning behind that, it all depends. And a wealthy donor who's pulling the strings, the financial strings, again, that whole notion of managerialism, right? Are we more concerned about that? I mean, and those are very real consequences, right? I mean, this funder can say, hey, look, I'm taking my money elsewhere, then leaves the agency in jeopardy altogether. So context definitely does matter, but it's written as a practice dilemma. These kinds of decisions, closing and opening programs and who to serve, those are decisions that are made all the time. They have ethical implications, and so Rachel's point online is a good one about how it's done. I think David's point, other factors that should be taken into consideration are important. But for our students to understand when there is an ethical dilemma and when there is not, right, is an important one. For you as educators to understand that distinction, when it's there, when it's not, I think it's helpful in trying to navigate what we're going through. There's another scenario, we won't get to it, we'll do something else a little bit later on because I want to keep moving. So we're about 10 minutes after 11? Pardon me? 20. Wow, I gotta get moving. All right, so that was the second scenario, which is fascinating. But all right, so here's the ethical decision-making model. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. This is Reamer's model, right? Identify ethical issues. You identify the individuals. You tentatively decide all courses of action. You thoroughly examine the reason for those actions. You consult with other agency personnel, and then you make your decision, monitor, and document. Those are the 6 steps of Reamer's model. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Let me show you another model that we show to our interprofessional students, which I think is interesting. This is Glover's model. And the steps are on the left-hand side, and then the information you want. And I highlighted certain key aspects, because there's a gabillion ethical models out there. Reamer tends to be the one, the go-to, that most schools of social work kind of gravitate to, but there are a lot of them. This one is practiced in medical settings, and I highlighted 3 steps because I think those 3 steps are really interesting. The second step, what is my gut reaction? I like that. That is missing from Reamer's model. The 7th one, what justifies my choice? Why am I making the choice that I'm making? Right? What are some things that don't factor into that justification and which ones do? And then how can you prevent being in that situation in the first place? So there is what's the term I'm looking for? What's the word I'm looking for? Analysis. You know what, David, you know what I'm saying. It'll come to me. It just escaped right in my head. When you examine an action after the fact. That's when it's really too late. It'll come to me. Thanks for the suggestions. It'll come to me. So how do you... Oh, that's going to drive me crazy. All right. But why number 2? Why is number 2 important? Okay, so hold on. I'm just going to lean in.
Thinking your personal values are going to come out of the gut. I mean, that's...
Yeah. So for students, when you're making these kinds of decisions, where you're positioned, what you're feeling, how it resonates with you, if you're not aware of that, you're going to make a decision based on those feelings if you're not aware of it. And you're probably going to make decisions based on them anyway, but at least have some level of awareness. This is the emotional intelligence that we need to build into ethical decision making. I think that's missing from Reamer's model. I think it's a very important step to say to your students, I want you to slow down and think about where you're at. How do you feel about what you're experiencing, what is happening, based upon your own experience, based upon whether you're triggered, based upon your own knowledge base, based upon your ideological beliefs. Where are you? I think it's a really important message to build in. Then that whole notion of what justifies your choice, to see the context, right? That's them pulling in and saying, okay, where I work and who I work with and the long-term and or short-term implication of this decision and what it might mean further out. Playing that out with your students, I think is also very helpful in them understanding, again, this constructivist view of how and why we make decisions. So those 2 elements, I think, are really important to build into an ethical decision-making model. We'll talk more about how to use these models because I don't think they're utilized enough. I think we just blow through them, right? We just blow through them and or even really not considering them. They're there, but how much are they brought into our practice, whether that be in the classroom or in the field setting? You're taking a picture of this one. You're going to get these slides. So I appreciate you taking pictures. I didn't want to get them to you early for obvious reasons, but I will make them available to you. So you'll have them. Yes, absolutely. Online as well. You'll get them. We'll make them all available. And I'm also thinking of giving you the scenarios that are in front of you. We're not reaching them. I may develop additional ones to send out to you because I think to practice these real scenarios, realistic, because that maximum impact it's definitely a very real situation that could happen. But having them practice that and to be thinking through all these different elements, I think is really important. Here's why being able to recognize and to resolve ethical dilemmas is so important. Because inherent in the resolution of an ethical dilemma is the possibility of committing, oh, I got an extra word in there, an ethical violation. I just noticed that. Nothing like having something right on the big screen to point out your typos. A gabillion times seeing it, but not until now do I see that. Does everybody get this? You can. Yeah, let me correct it first. Yeah, right. Yeah, don't figure this one. That's funny. That's funny. Right? Is the possibility of committing an ethical violation by resolving one over the other, so that justification of working it through is really important. Let's talk about professional liability. I don't know where folks are online, if they're mostly Ohio or they're from out of state, but this is just Ohio. The provision of the code that speaks to professional liability. I just gave you this for reference. Let me tell you that I talked about earlier the conscientious objection laws that are in Ohio that medical personnel can object, right? That is actually 4753.10 if you want to see it in the statutes. The Ohio Administrative Code 4753. 4757 governs social workers, as you all know. 4753 obviously is for medical personnel in the Code of Ethics, in the Ohio Revised Code. Okay. Here, when we're talking about professional liability, I want to get your take on this. These are investigations, complaints, this is all public information, from our own licensing board that shows you what has been happening over the past 6 years in terms of the number of complaints of violations of ethical responsibilities. So when I talk about we're at a crossroad, things are happening, right? What is happening? And you see in 2020, what might explain that little dip otherwise, right? COVID, so things kind of shut down a little bit. We took a step back, but still a fair amount. Question?
I'm just clarifying, it's all licensings. So,
Yes.
Because LPCC's marriage family
Yes,
therapy,
correct.
very different training than
Correct.
social work.
It is very different training, but in Ohio, the proportion of social work to the other professions is significant. So there are three. So we have a composite board, right? Marriage and family therapists, very, very small percentage. The LPCC is a little bit more, but not nearly rivaling what it is in social work. There are, and I have numbers, actually, I don't have the LPCCs, but I want to say 26 or 29,000 social workers in the state of Ohio. So for those who are licensed at a associate's level, 323, so let's just stick with the master's and bachelor's level, it's 16,510. At the clinical level, we have 10,078. So 16,000 social workers at the master's level, clinical 10,000 statewide. If you look at and I'm trying to find the exact number because I heard this in a meeting and I'm trying to find the exact source. I believe that counting the US and Canada all together, my initial thought was there was about 450,000 social workers in our country, and including Canada, about 450,000 strong. Okay? But back to this. We are seeing an increase in violations. I don't know if it is based on some of those factors we were talking about, especially the ones, right, managerialism, individualism, and how we then, the implication of how do we measure competency, right? It's really interesting. You want to say?
Are these complaints or are these actual ethical violations that were determined to be
so
ethical violations?
so complaints is even higher. So in let's say 2022, there were 988 complaints. They resulted in investigations, 605. Of those 605, how many of them are findings? Yet to be determined, or I don't have that number. Okay? But something's going on, right? Something's clearly going on. What do you think might be going on? Go ahead.
Going back to one of the first slides that you put with all of the things attacking our ethics, I feel like COVID really shifted our culture as a whole, and it's really turned into a what's in it for me type of situation with every entity I work with. And not only that, but staffing, just supports everywhere I look are lacking these days. When I'm in a position where I'm trying to help one of my families and no supports are out there, it makes you want to do what needs to be done to help them, and it's not always ethical. It gets frustrating when insurance is, ultimately the decider on a lot of things, or,
right.
The requirements that need to be met for medical equipment are unreachable for someone that desperately needs it. You get in these situations where someone's this far away from meeting the criteria for something, and it's very tempting to, that's when those ethics really start.
Totally understand what you're saying. I mean, you're proving what I'm saying, right? The context of how you make, because you can then justify your actions by the environment that you're working in and say, what's the greater good here, right? What is the greater good despite what my ethical obligation is? And when those two things are in conflict, what are you likely to do? And to err on the side of what you believe is helping the profession. It's really interesting. I just read a case. I'm going to share this because it's somewhat public, but yet still anonymous. Because part of it too is, I think, us understanding is our interpretation of the code, how we interpret the code and how strictly we interpret the code. We had I read an investigation where a social worker made a complaint against another social worker for blurring professional boundaries by buying a almost homeless man who was in danger of being homeless, had no family, no relative, very low income, buying him a pair of sheets for his bed. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. She said, what did you say? I don't believe I heard what I just heard. That a social worker made a complaint against another social worker for buying bed sheets for a client, saying that that purchase blurred professional boundaries. That's interesting, right? That's very interesting when you think about it. Does it blur your professional boundaries? Is it an ethical violation? Nah, but it's really interesting that it is interpreted as such. Go ahead.
I think the piece that is really missing is the talking to one another, because I feel like if the social worker that complained actually talked to the social worker that made the purchase, their feelings may have been different. And I can say, as an adjunct instructor, I had a student, this was at the beginning of COVID, still new to Zoom and I'm still struggling with technology. But I had a student that made a complaint to the board about me because they said they saw a patient's medical record on the screen, but I didn't know that they could see that at the time, because there's a way that we know now, that you can show one screen and only that screen. And they never told me that they could see that, but they complained to the board. So I found that very interesting.
Yeah.
There was no
Yeah.
conversation.
You want to say up here? It is, I mean, the rules are, things are changing so quickly, especially when it comes to technology.
The board does.
Pardon me, wait. I'm sorry.
I agree with you because you heard my response, but to hold the other end of the dialectic, I do think our code of ethics says that we have to report violations that we see.
But is it a violation?
Clearly, the student thought it. No, I hear you, because I am all about being interpersonally effective, but like I think this is the dialectic that we have.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. Up here.
I think something that we're forgetting to talk about during COVID, it allowed our political atmosphere for people to be more expressive about how they feel and express that towards others. And even though we're social workers, there's still a lot of biases, and we still all have our own personal opinions. And I think that's where a lot of these investigations are coming from, because I can say to you, I don't want to service you. I can say to you, I don't like this or I don't like that about you. And we forget, as social workers, we're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to be accepting of all.
Yeah. I mean, again, that whole intersection between self-interest and client's best interest gets very blurry and very, very fuzzy. One more comment? Oh, we got a couple of people. I want to move on, but I want you to speak. Go ahead.
Oh, I can't help but wonder if some of this has to do with people feeling empowered to just take someone down. I'm sorry. I mean, I've seen it more and more, like people going after people personally instead of having that conversation. It's really scary.
Yeah. So when you talk about making ethical decisions, even beyond the resolution of ethical dilemmas, just an ethical decision of, do I call or not call? What's my gut telling me? What's my motivation? What am I feeling? Am I angry? Do I have an axe to grind? What's going on with me that might be motivating and or justifying my actions? If we don't guide students to that point, to say that is so important contextually, then you are at risk of making the wrong decision or at least erroneous decisions. I want you to jump in if you feel absolutely compelled that you need to. Otherwise, I want to move on, because I want to ask you another question. You feel compelled. Okay, then have at it.
I wanted to ask, is there someone in the White House or in Washington that represents social workers? Because our profession is being chipped away. I'm on a federal grant. They want an LPC to do everything, and I have substance abuse experience. And I have to tell, the funder, even though it is SAMHSA, that what social workers can do.
Yeah.
And we're always having to explain our profession. And the other thing, too, the Social Work Reinvestment Act is still laying on the table. We're not being paid our worth.
Yeah. Great points. See, so that whole the justification of ourselves as a profession just takes different forms. It's just, it is manifested in different ways, right? But again, accreditation agencies and or funders is one of those really important factors that determines what and how we do what we do. Again, we're at this pivotal point as you as social workers. How do we respond? Who are we going to be and who are we becoming? And do we see these forces kind of shifting and changing who we are and being reactionary to them rather than being more proactive and making decisions to say, yes, here, no, here. And how do we do that collectively as a profession rooted in advocacy? When you talk about the changing technological environment, just a quick I know this is not a poll question, but maybe people can weigh in on the chat with the simple yes or no. And that is, what I'm saying is, again, how we relate to one another, right? That is changing. How many of you feel comfortable, or let me ask it this first. How many of you have ongoing text relationships with clients and or feel comfortable having students communicate with clients through text? Yes, you feel comfortable, or you have something to say?
No, I do. I'm a PBT therapist, so I do phone coaching by texting.
By texting?
Yep.
All right, other thoughts on that? Yeah.
I would say it depends on the population you're working with.
Okay, see, contextual, it all depends, right? Interesting, up here. Up here. Oh, sorry, Rob.
Well, I just think we have to think about, we're in 2023. A lot of people don't respond to things except via text. But I think, having a business phone and having a number that is not connected to your personal number so you can track, all your text messages would be good. But this is the way of the world now. So we can't just communicate by phone, unfortunately.
So how do we respond to that changing technology where there's an acceptance to say, all right, in my limited experience, limited clinical experience, I'm going, ooh, that's a slippery slope. Ooh, I feel a little uncomfortable with that. Yeah, when you talk about HIPAA violations and you're talking about the blurring of your role and what that communicates and the unintended consequences and even just the times when you're available. When you open up that text portal, the hours between 9 to 5 kind of melt away a little bit. And so then now I may be texting all times of hours of the day and or night. Go ahead, LaToya.
But I think it's important because technology does not change what would be a violation regarding HIPAA and protecting health information. So we understand a lot of our clients have phones where after a particular point in the month, they can only text. That does not mean you can text therapy. In fact, our governor released, because during COVID-19, people were using Skype and all kinds of HIPAA non-compliant devices. And they said, okay, you have a reprieve up until September of 2021. And then post that, if you are doing that, then you are violating ethics. So if you are texting a client, you are violating your code of ethics because that's not an encrypted HIPAA compliant platform that you should be discussing information with. And also, when you're texting, the other component you have to think about is who are you actually texting and who's reading it. So you shouldn't, this is not a practice, regardless of what technology way we are evolving, unless we are using HIPAA compliant encrypted devices and we have a way of regulating IDs for the other person on the other end of that.
And yet it's widely practiced that we do so for a variety of reasons and or justifications for doing so. So again, we're in this really major shift of how we are doing and how and what we are doing in terms of our profession. So it's really interesting. I want to move on. Is it compelling? It's real quick. Hold on, I gotta let you speak into my mic.
Back off that, like a lot of agencies now, they are having clients sign the consents for the text. So I didn't add that. So you're using your agency phone and they have to sign a consent to receive text. And the agency phone, of course, is being monitored. But of course, no therapy or anything like text reminders or appointments, and things like that. We're not talking about full out conversations and personal information, but to communicate to reach the clients. And there's a consent for that.
But you would agree it is a slippery slope.
Yes.
Once you open up that door, right? Yeah. Let me give you another quick. So this is how, it's black and white. It didn't translate to color. Well, that's too bad. I don't know why it didn't translate to color. Oh well. Here they are, right? The percentages. And you see standard of care is 22%, boundaries 14%. What's another high one? So look at boundaries. If you look at boundaries together, Sexual boundaries at 9 and then regular boundaries at 14, that's 23%. That's even higher than the standard of care. These are the types of violations that we are seeing. Unlicensed practice, failure to report, confidentiality, record keeping. So something is clearly going on, which is really interesting about how we're making decisions and the forces that are impacting our decision making. And what can you do as educators to inform our students to make better decisions? Let's talk about civil liability real quick. Can you give me a time? Oh, I got 15 minutes. All right. So here is civil liability as differentiated from professional liability. This is if you get sued. I like to show this because I think a lot of social workers don't understand what it takes in order to be civilly liable. I'm not doing that. I'm not getting sued. I'm not losing my license. I'm not going to, oh my God, she's not going to take my house, right? What does that mean? Where do you draw that line in terms of liability when you are violating someone's right to the point where there is a civil suit? So if there is civil liability, the courts are going to go through these stages. They work themselves from the bottom to the top. This is how it works. So whether or not you fall in Walmart or fall and slip on the ice at work or someone hits your car or any kind of tort law that uses a negligent standard, they're going to use this to determine whether or not negligence exists. If you are a social worker and you potentially harm someone, and they bring suit against you, it is the same standard. Don't care what? It's the same standard. So this is the civil liability, the negligent standard that courts will work through. The first step is to determine, is there a duty? Is there a duty by, so let's say it is confidentiality. Do social workers have a duty to their clients to protect their confidentiality? Yes, right? Can you think of a situation where perhaps confidentiality, I was speaking in an elevator and somebody overheard me, was confidentiality breached? Yes, right? Next, by me breaching that confidentiality, someone suffered a harm. Now, with social work, other than differentiated from someone slipping and falling and breaking a limb, harm is a little bit hard to define, right? But you got to establish that there's some harm, either a psychological distress or some medical distress, something, a hospitalization, a suit, whatever. You have to determine that. If there is harm, yes, check. Was then that breach, was that communication then the cause of that harm? If not, it would have happened anyway because of something else going on. Then no. But if yes, check. Yes. The final step then, proximate cause, is can you make a direct connection? It may have been part of the cause, but can you make a direct connection from your breach to that harm? Straight line, not an intervening variable, that's something else factored in. But you can clearly say, but for the fact that you had this conversation in an elevator with someone, that is what caused that harm. If you can establish that, check. That is very, very hard to prove. Proximate cause. Fascinating case, wish we could talk about it, called Paul's graph. Long Island Railroad versus Paul's graph. I was going to say Tarasoff, but we all know the Tarasoff case. That ain't it. It's Paul's graph. Paul's graph case. Palsgraff. If you Google Paul's graph, Long Island Railroad, fascinating fact pattern. It's back in, I'm going to say 1920s, 19-teens, of how the courts established proximate cause. But this is the order. So it is very, very hard to be civilly liable for any kind of action that you would do. So to have a realistic expectation that that exists. Okay? Have a realistic expectation. Questions on this? I think it's fascinating to know this. Palsgraf, I think it's Palsfra, Palsgraf, Graff, Palsgraff, I think. You'll find it. It's off by memory. It's been a long time. All right, I wanted you to do another small group activity. Let's see if we can do it real quick. I have like 10 minutes. I have 8 minutes. All right, let's not. Okay, so let's do it together. Let's do it together. Let me give you one scenario. Let me give you this one. We'll stay in the room. So read this. Okay, you got this? Okay. You can determine whether or not there's professional liability. Does he violate a standard? Is there an ethical violation? And or is there civil liability? Was there a duty, breach, harm, cause, proximate cause? That's really tough to work it through in such a short period of time. So in your tables, discuss it. Take a minute or two to discuss it, and then I want you to post your answer. A is professional, C is civil, or B is civil, or C is both. You got your answer? So I want you to post your letters once you determine. Okay. All right, online. Are you ready to go? Ooh, we got A's and C's. Fascinating. All right, they have their poll question up. Oh, are they coming back? Oh, perfect. All right, so online, do you have the mic? Nope, you don't. All right, so online, we have A at 21%, B at 6%, and overwhelmingly 74% are saying both for C. And here in the room, we have only 3 A's and everybody else is C. All right, why C? Who put C? Why are you justifying C? And I'm going to go back to this, because this, right? I'm going to say the A is given. Why C? Wait. Here it comes. I don't have to lean in.
We were conflicted because the direct cause was the cafeteria worker spreading the rumors about the student.
Cleaning person.
The cleaning person. Spreading the rumors about the
student. If it was a cafeteria person, we're way out of
Sorry about that.
You got big trouble.
Sorry, cafeteria people. I love them so much. But so, even if the file had been out, even if the cleaner read it, if the cleaner had not said anything, the other dominoes would not probably have fallen.
Okay, well, you're making an argument against
I know, we were conflicted.
Okay.
But the reality is, if the file hadn't been left out, none of this would have happened.
Okay.
So we're conflicted.
Okay. Somebody else. What about this tape? No, let's do this tape. No, anybody. What about this table? Anybody? What are your thoughts? I'm going to C. Why you pick C? Yeah, hold on.
So we thought it was both because the breach happened with the person who was doing the files, like he left it open. And even though he locked the door, if you could still see it, that was his breach, which caused the harm.
Okay. All right. One more. Hold on. 74% said C.
In the real world, when you're working with mental health clients and substance abuse clients, they fall under something called the 42 CFR if you're working under a grant of any kind, and they ask you to have it in a locked room, in a locked drawer at all times.
Yeah. Right.
And then by outing that person, you cause harm.
Yeah.
With gender dysphoria, so you're saying that's a person from the LGBTQ. That person may not want their status known.
Yeah, right.
And that could cause harm to them.
All right, so are you making an argument for A?
All of the above.
There's an argument for A, clearly.
Yeah.
Right? You violated an ethical principle. All right, so I'm going to say yes. The A is given. It is. So those who said A, you are correct. Let's now move to C about civil liability. Is there a duty to protect records? Yes. Was there a breach of not protecting those records? Yes. Was there harm because of that breach? Yes, great. Was the fact that they left those records out the cause of that harm? Oh, we got a no. But we had mostly yeses. Who said no? That was you. This is why you're at a A. Okay, so you're good. We're all good. Everybody else from the C said yes, there was a cause. Can you now go to the last step and say, we know absolute certainty that because he left that record on his desk, by the way, in a locked office, that is what caused, let me go back, let me go up. That is what caused the hospitalization. Can we say that because he left that record on his desk, that is what caused the hospitalization? You say no. You say no. Therefore, you have to say A. Right? You have to say A. Right? Oh, you switched. Oh, you were always A? You were always A. You didn't make that proximate cause leap. Look how difficult that is, right? That hospitalization could have been caused by any number of factors. We have no idea that was the exact cause. And here, when it comes to the work that we do with emotional instability, there are so many factors and causes to that it's hard to say that something that we were look, I'm not making an argument that we go out. I can start breaking the code all I want because I'm never getting sued. No, I'm not saying that. I know the law, but you got to prove proximate cause. And if you don't, right, I'm not saying that. It's helpful though to have a healthy understanding, right, and perspective of what it might take, right? Because here's the thing, we may know where that line is drawn, but we don't want to walk up to it, right? You don't want to walk up to it, but understand where it is, because to have to go through this rigmarole, you don't even want to be in a position where you have to do that. But it is helpful to know, and it is helpful for our students to have a realistic expectation of what is and what is not considered liability and where we need to be focusing our attention on. Those other tensions that I talked about, the context for how decisions are made, the lack of emotional intelligence of how you are approaching your clients and or your colleagues and your awareness of your own feelings, right? What's happening politically in this country, the attacks on certain populations, the shift towards managerialism and how we're replacing one set of outcomes for another and losing sight of the clinical outcomes for the sake of a bottom line. Those are the real challenges that are really impacting our profession, and where do we stand with respect to them, right? Where do we stand? So if I go through, because I had 2 more scenarios, here are some ways to integrate ethical content. Set aside time in every supervision to talk about these ethical issues. How you talk about them, I'll get to that in a minute. incorporate ethical content in the classroom every single time, thinking about something small that relates to ethics. Identify relevant cases. There are things that are happening all the time in your organizations, even if they're practice dilemmas, and say, tell me what's the ethical implication, or is this an ethical dilemma? Think of real life scenarios that are really going on to move away from, I mean, if they are hypothetical, give them the greater context that they need, right? So that students can experience what that struggle is, the Jerry Sandusky effect. If you remember anything, you're going to remember that, right? The Jerry Sandusky effect. Develop real-life case scenarios. Distinguish ethical dilemmas from practice dilemmas. Easier said than done. Identify sources and tensions within ethical dilemmas. All the factors. So you said it back here about accreditation and funders and licensing that really impact that decision making. Explore their personal values. Have students reflect on their own feelings and values. Guide them to consider other perspectives. Here's the one that I really like. Number 5, slow the process down. Right? Those ethical steps, don't take them all at once. Focus on one. Make that the topic of your supervisory session. Build that one section into your classroom. Let's just talk about identifying all the possible actions. We'll get to the implications later, but right now, that's all we're going to focus on. Let's identify how would we frame this ethical dilemma and/or practice dilemma. That's all you deal with. Break it up. Incrementalism when it comes to ethical decision making, I think, is a good thing when you don't have to do it live in the moment, because otherwise, we don't do it. We don't think about it. So break it up. Make it more relevant and more manageable in your practice. And then look for readings and/or supplemental materials. I always say to our students, every self-respecting social worker is going to have a direct link on their computer to the Code of Ethics, right? It's one of your favorites. It's there. Whether you use it or not, have it there. Click up, go straight to it. Because really interesting, Ohio is one of the only states, I think, that has a really robust code of ethics. I'm not talking about NASW. That's aspirational. I'm talking about the mandatory code, the licensing board code, the one that has actual consequence to you keeping your license or not. We want to live up to the NASW. It is a model, if you will, of how we should act. Although some states just incorporated wholesale as their code of ethics. I think personally that's a mistake because it doesn't give you the depth and the specificity that you need that Ohio does. So Ohio has a really good model. So have that accessible and available to you. I know it's a lot, but I think it's just helpful and necessary. Finally, I will say, for social work to remain relevant and effective as a profession, rooted in human relatedness, social work educators must continuously construct, interpret, and apply the code of ethics to reflect technological advancements, ideological challenges, and a changing social environment. We have to respond to all of these challenges when it comes to ethics, right? It's going to define who we are and what we're going to become over, I think, the next 10, 20, 30 years. This is a pivotal moment for us. It really is, as a profession. Hopefully we can rise to the challenge as they did in 1915 by opening that school. Thanks. You're going to high five me.
Thank you, Dr. Wilkes. That was amazing. I told you you were all in for a treat, right? That was incredible. Thank you. And thank you to the staff here for serving us and providing amazing food. How good was this food? It's incredible. So much. Thank you. So online participants, your link for the evaluation is in the chat. So please make sure that you fill that out so you can get your CEUs. And your certificates will be emailed to you. For those in the room, please make sure to fill out your evaluations and then bring them out to Miss Jones to the front of the room, and then she will exchange your certificates for you at that time. Thank you all for being here. And if any of you want to serve as an external field instructor for another organization, sometimes organizations don't have social workers on staff. We would love to talk to you about that. So thank you all again for all your work. We really appreciate you. You are so wonderful. Thank you so much. Take care. Have a great day.